as you layer in things like AI, where now there's one term that's used a lot in the space is lease abstraction, meaning I can start to, instead of having to read through an entire contract, I can now start to abstract lease clause or legal information to make sure, one, it's compliant, but two, I'm using the same legal clauses across the board. Or from an efficiency standpoint, I'm writing a new contract. I've got, thousands of leases out there. Instead of having to go back to the legal team, is there a contract where we've tried to kind of put in this concept? If it's more of a more unique concept, now I can just pull that clause from the database versus having to go rewrite, kind of recreate the wheel, so to speak. So there's a lot of efficiencies being gained on that side.
Welcome to CRE Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CRE Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is the podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today's interview is sponsored by Building Insurance and Risk. When you invest in real estate, it pays to work with a real estate investor protection specialist to protect yourself and your investment from catastrophic loss. The experts at Building Insurance and Risk focus on real estate investor protection. They provide you with multiple insurance coverage offers and a side-by-side coverage comparison. To learn more, go to buildinginsurancerisk.com. Today, my guest is David Blumenfeld. David is the co-founder of Next Rivet, a Silicon Valley-based consultancy dedicated to assisting traditional physical businesses in leveraging digital technologies. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with David Blumenfeld about how AI is transforming real estate. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CRE Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, David Blumenfeld. Welcome to CRE Radio.
Great. Thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well, likewise. And before we get started, if you could take just a minute to share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I am the co-founder of Next Rivet. We've been a property tech or prop tech consultancy founded kind of late 2019, right before, unbeknownst, we were screaming towards the pandemic, obviously at the time, but worked out okay. Prior to founding Next Rivet, I really kind of cut my teeth in the real estate space starting in 2012 as a founding executive team member at Westfield Labs, which was a digital division of Westfield Malls. Westfield was a international shopping center company founded in Australia, with properties there, the US and the UK. And then around 2017 or so was acquired, 2017-18 was acquired by Unibail-Rodamco, a French mall operator, operating a lot of shopping centers in Europe, and was looking for a US and rest of world portfolio. And so through that acquisition, it's now a company called URW, Unibail-Rodamco Westfield. After the acquisition, we essentially saw this opportunity to spin ourselves out and do a lot of things that we were doing at Westfield Labs for rest of the world. And I guess I should explain in the labs context, we were essentially a digital division charged with bringing different kind of technology and digital solutions into the physical environment, especially back in 2012. A lot of pressures from Amazon and other online commerce channels that were at the time somewhat threatening, obviously, to the physical space, because there was certainly an increasing percentage of retail sales that were going digital versus physical. And the shopping center space was really looking to essentially stay relevant more than anything else. Like, how do we stay relevant as shoppers are more digitally savvy? They expect to have even somewhat, digital experiences even in the physical environment. And so we were charged with doing those things. And it was a unique opportunity really to kind of work across the board from, front end consumer experiences, whether those were basic websites, mobile apps, to, services like food pre-order and delivery from the restaurant to the food court, to up leveling the parking experience from kind of your standard boom gates to license plate recognition tied to a credit card, so you could kind of seamlessly drive in and out of the parking garage, to different digital signage in the property, and then going on the backside, the back, kind of back of house, if you will, to a lot of building management operations. That's certainly where AI is starting to bring, and we can talk more about that. But how do you streamline operations from a technology perspective on back of house or through relationships between the landlord and the tenant? So really a whole slew of different solutions and challenges we worked on as a small company or small division within a large property company. We didn't develop most of the technology ourselves, so our expertise was really lay in going out and finding the best solution providers for each one of the challenges we faced, getting them under contract, and ultimately, getting them live. And I think that's a huge thing that we see with our client base. We as we spun out our consultancy, we don't just work with, I said, don't just work with shopping centers. We work with commercial real estate and multifamily residential. You don't really see a shopping center property being built these days that isn't mixed use anyway, which is really kind of gotten us in that space. And I think the biggest thing we see in the real estate space from a technology perspective, obviously we're all we're a conservative, slower moving industry in general, but it's really, how do you move from that PowerPoint slide and put it into action? And that's really our focus. It's we can certainly do the strategy. We've done plenty of that kind of work, but ultimately it's, how do you roll up your sleeves and get these things launched and live and tested? Because that's where we see a lot of companies falter, because they get into this kind of analysis paralysis and never actually move into action.
Uh, I love that on multiple fronts. The death by committee kind of a sense of things, or whether you have the idea, the PowerPoint, everybody's in agreement, let's go, rah rah, and you leave, and nothing happens, and you come back later, and still, what happened? Okay, let's go get it this time, and so I'm kind of curious, just in that. I mean, maybe getting ahead of myself in our conversation, but if I understand right, where you guys are positioned is between or do you work more with the landlord? Is that kind of the focus of the opportunity for you guys for Next Rivet?
Yeah, we work with the real estate owner, the real estate operator, the landlord. Um,
Okay.
those are generally our clients, and then we are fairly technology and vendor agnostic, so to speak. So we're not trying to sell any specific solution into that landlord. It's really about understanding their needs, and then ultimately figuring out the best solution for them. I think, unlike a lot of the larger consulting firms too, because we don't have our own proprietary tech, we're not trying to lock you in automatically to 5 years if we sell you our tech, because we're the only ones who know how to maintain it. It's really kind of, again, finding the best solution for what you need.
That makes a lot of sense. In that, you mentioned a lot of different, I guess, potential solutions, digital solutions. One that always appealed to me was that parking one, just from the ease of in and out, finding a parking spot and being able to pay for parking instantly, as opposed to having to go find the kiosk, and then all the challenges that can come with that, whether or not it's taking cash, or it's not reading cards or whatever. Um, would can you kind of give kind of a high level overview of some of the tools that you see that commercial real estate owners and operators are missing, or that there's an opportunity for them to add, um, or is it basically kind of like we were talking about, or what you introduced here in the conversation? I mean, It seems like it's such a far and wide topic when you say digital. I'm just trying to kind
Yeah.
of understand what how far and wide that goes.
Yeah, I think sometimes the best, easiest way to think about it, if you think about kind of maybe the first, so there's kind of two sides, right? There's the shopper slash tenant journey, if you will, in coming and using the property. And then there's kind of the back of house building management operations journey, if you will. So if you think about it from first from a customer or a office tenant perspective, you mentioned parking, and something as mundane as parking, right? We all go, we need to park our car. We want to do it as fast as possible. We want to find a spot as fast as possible. And certainly there's been a little more innovation in the retail real estate side, simply because you have more shoppers and more turnover on a daily basis than you do from maybe an office tenant, for example. But, if you think about what parking is, it's the first and last touch point that you have with that property, right? So if you have a good parking experience, it may set up your day well, but certainly like when your last impression of that property, if I'm can, like say, get on the property, have the boom gate open, find my spot. Maybe there's reserved areas that I can take advantage of ahead of time. And then on the way out, boom gate opens, my credit card's charged. Maybe that's tied to a loyalty program, depending on the type of property you're at. Um, so you've taken something as basic and necessary as something like parking, and obviously up level that experience, um, and hopefully you've left a good impression with with your customers or your tenants. But then there's as you think about, you go into a more modern building, there's and you can think about parking this way too. It's access control, right? How do you get in and out of the building? It used to be keys. Now then it was fobs. Now most people are used to doing a lot of that on their phones. So you think about what's the kind of the things like tenant management platforms, where if I'm working in a certain space, I can, if I have an app, for example, that gets me into the building, into the office, maybe also highlights the amenities in the building. A lot of times you're seeing more and more, certainly with mixed use environments, where you have, in an office space, I have, maybe there's a gym downstairs, maybe there's a limited amount of retail that's there. Can I get access to, whether it's menus, different amenities? Can I book can I book into the gym? Could I book a conference room? All those things that I now would like to have in one place, which were previously separate actions. That's another example of how you can kind of bring all those together from a digital platform perspective. Um, and then from a building operations or building management perspective, um, there's a few things, right? Understanding, and this was important during the pandemic, but I think people are still interested in, like, kind of things around occupancy. What are traffic patterns that are happening in a space? Certainly in a shopping center, really important to understand where people are going, which retailers they're going into, which ones they're not, because that affects things like tenant mix and all of those things. But even in a more commercial, more office space environment, you're interested in understanding how many people are going into the building, where they're going. If I'm, even within a specific office, if I'm trying to understand if I have a maybe combination of on-site workforce and remote workforce, understanding how often people are coming in, what spaces they're taking advantage of. So there's some interesting kind of spatial analytics that I think come into play. And then the one of the things that excites me the most is around kind of building operations, and what's termed as building management systems, or BMSs. If you think about kind of the Google Nest of your house, right, which is kind of in an automated way, maybe turning up the heat, turning down the heat, kind of providing some limited, what's the health of your building. In a bigger commercial space, you no longer necessarily need to have people turning the dials on that, right? So something that's controlling the HVAC, the lighting, um, a lot of the things around energy usage that start to get economized and made more efficient. Now you're actually starting to save real money if the machine, so to speak, is doing a lot of that optimization, versus you're relying on somebody to press a button to turn it up or down, or on or off. So I think there's a lot of a lot of nerve center stuff, if you will, inside the building that gets really interesting, especially in a commercial space.
So the utility usage, the heat, the lights, and all that stuff seems to be kind of more of a cost savings uh, opportunity for the landlord, and definitely something I think everybody welcomes. Your lower utility bill definitely helps the bottom line. Um, in the kind of the spectrum of tools you have available. Is there a percentage that you would categorize as cost savings tools as opposed to uh, missing revenue recognition tools? Is there a way to think of them in that light, or is it more of or does that not even is that not part of the thought process?
Certainly ROI is part of the thought process. I don't know because again, we're not in the business of running or owning any specific technology ourselves. It would be hard for me to put a percentage on what piece versus that. I think, it all depends on, you have certain clients, for example, who, we've put in and talk about kind of revenue recognition. Still a decent number of clients who are doing things, especially internationally, who are, we're doing things on spreadsheets still, right? When we've gone in and helped them put in a leasing management platform. So the ability to kind of store all your leasing information in one place, obviously run a leasing pipeline in one place, um, be able to be reminded of renewals, have all your legal clauses, all the things that you kind of need to run the leasing process in one platform and one system. And that's not necessarily, I mean, I can talk about how AI helps some of those things, but that's just simply a digital platform to kind of manage that entire process from lease. And now you're seeing, there's other platforms that are helping companies. Once you've signed a lease, what's the process from going from lease to actually move in? And obviously from an office tenant, that's a different kind of build out and fit out to a retail type tenant who may be putting up, remodeling the entire space. So, and then tying those things together, right? So you have more of a kind of soup to nuts process, in one system. So I think there's a lot of those kind of things that are helping to make sure that revenue recognition happens in the first place, and leases aren't missed and somebody doesn't expire. And you're all and compliance too. You talk about from just a risk perspective, and making sure that everything is as tight as possible from a legal perspective too. And I think as you layer in things like AI, where now there's one term that's used a lot in the space is lease abstraction, meaning I can start to, instead of having to read through an entire contract, I can now start to abstract lease clause or legal information to make sure one, it's compliant, but two, I'm using the same legal clauses across the board. Or from an efficiency standpoint, I'm writing a new contract. I've got, thousands of leases out there. Instead of having to go back to the legal team, is there a contract where we've tried to kind of put in this concept? If it's more of a more unique concept, now I can just pull that clause from the database versus having to go rewrite, kind of recreate the wheel, so to speak. So there's a lot of efficiencies being gained on that side. Um, so I think leasing management systems, and then I just all anybody who's, I mean, we still have companies that are still, taking checks, and there's just an up level, I think, that sometimes needed on, some of the basic operational side of things, let alone AI or anything else. I think there's just a still a surprising number of companies who are still doing things in an old school way. And I think eventually, you know, people are not going to want to do business with those companies. And that's not those are not the big real estate companies. Certainly those they've all evolved, but we certainly know that there are thousands of smaller real estate companies out there, who are still fairly old school in the way they operate. And I think at a certain point, they're not going to be able to do that and survive.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly the adoption of technology, which I'm kind of I find myself in kind of the slow ski lane. If I know how something works and you're telling me I got to do it something differently until I actually sit down and put the effort in, and understand the application, the benefits, or if I'm busy with things, but I get the, this is the future, right? I mean, all of these things, and to be able to be that dialed into every aspect of your business, and to make it run more efficient. I mean, that all makes good sense. Um, you know, we've talked about different aspects and stuff, and you were talking about like contracts and stuff. And is there a kind of a global source where you turn to identify what I mean, is it AI chat, oriented type stuff where you enter into, a prospective work with the client and kind of summarize what the situation is to find out what the solutions, the potential solutions to improve their situation are, or is this still each one's independent of each other?
I mean, each one's pretty independent of each other. I mean, a part of our expertise obviously is staying on top of the companies that are out there and what they're doing and what they're providing from a technology perspective. There certainly are some databases out there. I think the biggest issue though, and sometimes we see this a lot with certain clients. We'll come in a perfect world scenario. We'll come in, the client a lot. Okay, we need to figure out what our digital roadmap is going to be. What are our plans? Essentially, we'll come in, we'll identify some things they can be doing. We'll help them prioritize. We'll put it on a roadmap. We'll plan it out. It's not doing 30 things in a year. It's making sure we're also kind of at the at a good pace for both what needs to happen, but also what's realistic for the organization. And then go through a vendor selection process, and then ultimately, help manage that vendor or set of vendors all the way through launch, and doing that in concert with the teams in terms of as much kind of bandwidth they can provide us, so that we're also kind of cross training at the same time. Um, but the issue, a lot of times, the issue we see with companies who maybe, hey, we already kind of know what we want to do. We've started down. We're talking to this. We got approached by this great vendor, and we're working through it. And one of the biggest pitfalls is not really spending the time up front to put together what we call a project or product requirements document, a PRD, which is like, what are the business requirements and what are the technical requirements for this project? Because a lot of times a vendor gets selected without the right requirements up front, and then they're frustrated that the vendor's not conforming to what they thought they were gonna have at the end of the day. And sometimes that may be the vendor's fault and not and in pitching something they didn't have, but a lot of times it's just expectation setting, like in every other aspect of life, right? If you set the right expectations from what that product has to do, what the business requirements are, and then also from a technical perspective, then you set yourself up for a successful vendor relationship. And so a lot of times we'll come in and have to kind of pull it back a little bit and say, okay, wait, well, we didn't really define, you define this pretty well, but you didn't define these things pretty well. And this is why there's now, an argument over, or kind of a misalignment, so to speak, on what that vendor's providing versus what you're expected to get back. And so I think there's a lot of that work that needs to be done. And that's where we see, there's everybody would like to do all this stuff internally if they could, right? And so, but the reality is most people have their day jobs. And I mean, just like I'm not going to go out and put together architectural plans or tell you what you should do from a physical perspective in a building. There's just a level of expertise that, I've spent my entire career in tech. And so that is my wheelhouse versus kind of designing a physical space. And I think a lot of times, whether it's somebody in traditional real estate that just wants to do tech, or even a traditional IT team, which is great for, in a lot of cases, and this isn't across, this is a blanket, but a lot of times an IT team is great about the kind of running the guts of a building. It's different from innovation and really kind of putting in new software and new platforms. That's a different skill set. So I think it's important that the companies identify that and realize, like, okay, if we're going to move this forward, we can't necessarily always do it with the existing resources.
Right. And given that the kind of the planning that's required to execute, um, and so many times I've seen it where somebody starts with a solution, not understanding the problem, kind of thing, and then you don't end up with a satisfactory outcome because you haven't understood the circumstances that you're sitting in. But given that's kind of a longer term, what's a length of contract, or do you guys does Next Rivet, are you a long term kind of a partner in these things, or are you able to come in and assess the situation, identify the potential solutions, help them navigate, and then get out of the way, or how is it that you guys work?
I mean, we work in all different types. We've had simple, small, individual project engagements. We have, our longest tenured client right now is about 2.5 years. So it really just depends on what's needed, and we're flexible to that. A lot of times, and we tell this to clients, like, let's start with a smaller project, kick the tires on each other, and if we kind of prove ourselves out, then we go to the next phase. And we most often phase, even if we're looking at potentially a long-term project, we do put it into phases. So there's kind of these phase gate approaches where, okay, let's start out with, like I said, the roadmap. We're going to identify 10 things you could be working on. We prioritize this. We get to that end of that phase. Are we going to do any of them? Okay, we're going to prioritize 3. We're going to go do those. Great. Now we go to the next phase and we really scope them out, and we really understand from a cost perspective what the investment's going to be and ROI perspective. Great. Are we going to go do those 3 things? Maybe we decided we're just going to go do one, another phase. So then, and so the size of the engagement certainly depends on what people want to go and do, and we make sure that there's a step through process along the way, so that there's you're never saying to us, in most cases, unless we've been working together for a long time already, hey, let's bring these guys on for 3 years. We don't feel like that's realistic or necessarily great for your business. Let's start with a smaller project. We're not opposed to starting with a bigger project, but I mean, let's start bite size, get to know each other, and then we start to work through different phases of different initiatives.
Got it. So in kind of an initial, you mentioned kind of an overview, kind of a situation to come to understand what a global plan would be. Is there an identifiable common first, uh, task that you see property owners going towards? I mean, is there one that you see it's kind of a common, this is the first step we see people do?
Um, well, I think what we just talked about a lot of times, the first step is I found out about this cool solution, and that's kind of that sometimes kind of drags them into doing some digital things. Or most recently, it's, oh my gosh, like there's this AI thing out there. I've got to do something about it. And I think one of the things that we've also been in the role of right now is demystifying that, what AI a little bit. And I always, especially within tech, because there's plenty of jargon in real estate, and God knows there's plenty of jargon in tech and acronyms and all these things, right? And so, if you think about AI, I think there, in people's minds, they get like, oh, AI, it's whether you think of the Terminator, you think of a robot, or like, so you think of AI as a thing. AI is really an ingredient. It's an ingredient that's making the tech that's already out there better, or helping to create new technology, but it's not a standalone thing in most cases, right? And so if I think both of us are probably old enough to remember the Intel's old campaigns where they would talk about, you'd see a laptop commercial and it would be like at the end a little jingle, and it was Intel inside, right? You see the little Intel logo. I like, it's evolved now where I look at it, it's like AI inside, right? Okay, you see a new technology, and yeah, there's AI inside, but it's not the standalone thing. So instead of getting overwhelmed by, oh gosh, I've got to have AI, it's like, certainly you like the tools and the technologies you're putting in place to have AI, because they're going to make them smarter and probably more efficient. Um, but it's not a standalone thing. So in a good way, it's been a nudge for a lot of people to get on the technology train if they haven't been. In a bad way, I think it's also caused the pendulum to swing where it's like, I got to figure out AI. And some of these organizations are thrown in a kind of a tizzy because they're trying to figure out, they're trying to find a solution for a problem they don't necessarily have. And so I think there's, like I said, I think settling in on what are your plans? What are your like figuring out a couple things to start with and just incrementally improve versus trying to boil the ocean out of the gate, which is going to align anyway with the traditional real estate way of thinking, which is I'm not trying to do everything at once. I'm trying to plan a long-term business here. I think you've got to start now, but also the great thing about technology is you have the opportunity to try some things relatively inexpensively. And if they don't work, you can pivot away from them. If you build a building and you build it wrong, it's a much bigger issue. And so you have the ability, nobody wants to fail, but part of technology and trialing and pilots, you can try stuff and it's okay if it doesn't work. You just need to, you just need to adapt quickly. But if you're set up to do that and you set your thinking up to do that, then that's really how you move forward on a technology front, which is certainly different from a real estate front.
No, I like that. Think, kind of permission to fail, kind of a,
Hmm.
not a goal, but recognizing we're going to try something. And if it doesn't work,
Yeah.
worst case scenario, we go back to what we were doing or reassess. And also kind of a bite size, step by step process as opposed to, like you said, boil the ocean. Um, because I think it is the just the whole wave of technology can be overwhelming. And I think sometimes too, there's wrongly or just kind of mischaracterized a sense that this is the answer. This is the answer that we've been looking for, that it's going to take care of everything. And rarely have I ever seen something do everything all at once, better than ever before. But I think that there's a an incremental, like you were saying, kind of a makes things work better, user experiences better, but it doesn't fully take the place of. And I think that's where when I talk with people and kind of even my own sense of trying to get my head wrapped around AI and how it works, is just kind of more of recognizing, what it can do and its limitations, but also the benefit of it. And it's kind of an overwhelming conversation to have in a general sense. But I think when you get into specifics, it's more identifiable and more easy to understand and recognize what the potential benefits are. And then also kind of once you have some sort of understanding, be willing to take the risk, and I say risk, but just you know move forward
Take
and
the
see
leap,
how it works, and you know
take a
leaps are
chance.
probably
And I
better.
think
Yeah, yeah.
and I think it's you making some bets, certainly, but you can make smaller bets to start with. Um, and I think you made the point earlier, the tools are only going to be as good as how well they're adopted, right? You could have the best tools, and if nobody's using them, then and we that there's certainly a change management component that goes into all of this. And I go back to an example. I was at a early during the dot-com boom, was at a technology company, um, and we at one point our IT department decided that we wanted to change email clients from, can't remember which from which to which, but at the end of the day, they still just email. It was still a piece of software that enabled you to send an email. So the functionality wasn't dramatically different. It was just for whatever reason we wanted to make the switch. And so the uproar that happened internally when we switched from one email provider to another, when it was doing the same thing, it wasn't like it was changing a whole process or doing something that a lot of these systems now do. And it definitely was always something that stuck in my mind, like, wow, if it's this hard to change essentially the same thing to the same thing, like how hard is it to go from a manual process to an automated process where we actually have to learn the system? And so I think that's a key thing we deal with, again, a lot, especially with clients where we're working with something all the way through launch, is to get them. There's definitely a period of time, and I see it every time. There's a lot of whining if it doesn't work. Like they've had a completely manual process, and yet there's one thing in the new platform that doesn't work exactly as average. Like, well, okay, but this is still 95% better than what you were doing before. Anyway, and then, 3, 6 months later, everybody's like, okay, what's the next new feature we're going to add to the, people inherently don't like change. And so that's certainly part of this process is there's the tech side and then there's the human and the change management side that has to go along with it.
So how do you go about managing the expectations from your clients? Is it, kind of like, hey, if it doesn't work, we'll go back, or is there like a very proactive approach to getting everybody on board and understanding how it's going to work, or how do you guys go about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's part of doing the right scoping up front and getting the buy-in on, okay, this is what this platform is going to do. Making sure that you have all this, the right stakeholders involved, who are providing input to what the system's going to be, and then keeping them updated along the way, so it's not some big, surprise and reveal at the end. It's really an iterative process, both with the exec team who may just be kind of wanting it from a strategy and signing the checks to the working team who needs to actually be involved and understand the system. And so if you can kind of bring them on the journey, we found that's much better than just like, hey, we'll go off in a silo and get this all ready for you, and then we'll get trained on it. Um, and there's multiple trainings, and there's a lot of um, a lot of learnings that happen along the way, and you have to just kind of, I think we've learned to expect and roll with a lot of the initial complaining that's going to happen. There's always one person in the organization who is like, you've gotten buy-in from everybody, and they may have bought it at the beginning, but now it's not working like they thought, or they misunderstand how it's working, and they are the squeaky wheel internally, and you just have to kind of work through those things. And I have some great examples of people who were so opposed to what we were doing and now are like the biggest champions because they finally just got on board and got over themselves and got over that fear of change and the complication of change sometime, and realized that it actually improves what they're doing. They've got on the bus, so to speak. So every company has their own culture, and we've all worked with those people who are um, in the CYA mode of like, I never want to be wrong about anything, therefore I'm going to complain and complain until it's perfect. So that's just part of dealing with different personalities and different cultures.
No, well, I applaud you for that, because that's there is a matter of babysitting, and I think also what I found is how like in some of these types of situations where you can have multiple people say the complaint or whatever, or explain it, and you just kind of have to let everybody air it out, because you're going to get, a bunch more people saying the exact same thing, and it's all a matter of just kind of the process. But it's
Yeah.
funny. Hey, so tell me, what is an ideal prospective client for Next Rivet?
Um, Good question. I mean, I would say kind of anybody in kind of three asset classes. Certainly our Westfield experience, anybody running a retail real estate property, a shopping center, would be our lowest hanging fruit. But because there are so many shopping centers today that are part of mixed use environments, meaning with office and with multifamily residential, those are kind of our three kind of core asset classes, if you will. And even more so if they're connected in some way, or there's an opportunity to use digital to connect those asset classes. And then through a recent partnership with a group called Coresight Research, we launched a new brand called Core Rivet, which takes us a little bit more into the retailer space as well. So not just the landlords, but also some of those retail tenants as well. But certainly from a core real estate perspective, it's the three. It's the three that I mentioned.
Got it. Hey, David, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. By day, I'm an insurance broker, and as such, I like to ask my guests questions about risk. And when I'm working with my clients, there's three different ways we look at and come up with a strategy to consider as far as dealing with the risk. And the first way we look is we look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. When that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And if we cannot avoid nor minimize, we look to see if there's a way we can transfer the risk. That's what an insurance policy is. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. Could be your clients, could be vacancy rates, could be the I don't know, whatever the Fed rates, whatever it is that you see, or it could be technology, whatever it is that you consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I'm an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance related answer. And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, David Blumenfeld, what is the biggest risk?
We're going to answer it a couple different ways, if that's okay. So I think, I mean, and this first one might seem like a self-serving answer, but I think the risk for real estate companies in general for not looking at technology, and again, it doesn't have to be the biggest, the biggest, the newest, the flashiest, but if you're not incorporating technology into your day-to-day operations, whether it be from a marketing perspective, a company, a leasing perspective, building management, et cetera, you are getting left behind. And the good news for you is that the real estate industry moves slow, but as it gets more and more competitive certainly in certain asset classes, office being one of them, to not be investing in kind of future proofing your building and your company is going to come back and bite you in the long term. And both from a just an operational perspective, but also eventually from a recruiting perspective, where people who you're gonna want in your company are not going to want to work at your company if you're not forward thinking. From a tech perspective, I think the biggest concern right now, excitement and concern, certainly is with AI and things like conversational AI, like ChatGPT. We have clients who their legal departments come in and said we can't use AI at all. And I think the practical concern there is a risk of, if you're using kind of a ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot, one of these, or Google Gemini, is that depending on the information you're putting in to have, let's say you're like, I want to put, I use it a lot for writing better copy, maybe writing a better email than I wrote already, because I realize, I'm just not saying that quite right. But it's much more powerful than that. You can put in financial data, for example, that would spit back a spreadsheet for you, or different analysis that might normally take hours in Excel. There is risk when you start to upload proprietary information from a financial perspective. But you need to kind of balance that risk with what you're using those tools for, because they are very powerful and very efficient as well. So I think it's making sure you don't swing the pendulum one way or the other. Like you need to certainly use AI in your business, but I think if you're going to start to do a lot of things through AI, there are ways to protect the information that you're putting out there, and you don't have to just throw something in ChatGPT. You can have an application that's specific to your company that leverages AI, but may be able to spit out kind of your own private version of ChatGPT, so to speak. So you just need to understand the implications and the risks of if you're using kind of a generic service. There is a risk that you're putting that data. It's not necessarily means that those companies are going to use it against you, but you are uploading that information into the cloud. And I think it's funny, you've seen a lot in America around like, oh, we're going to ban TikTok because we're worried about China, stealing all this data. Well, China's come out with a lot of new AI platforms lately, and nobody's talking about the data privacy implications. Like, I would be much more concerned about putting anything in a Chinese AI software platform versus my social media via TikTok. So it's just funny how people are not thinking about things holistically, and I think that's just what you need to make sure you need to do. But again, as I said in my earlier very comment at the beginning of at the beginning of the conversation, don't get into analysis paralysis where you justify doing nothing because you have to overthink it over and over again.
Yeah. No, definitely some words of wisdom there, and I think the takeaway for me is, this is the future, but you don't have to do it all at once. Kind of,
Yep.
kind of baby step it, or walk it in as opposed to leap in, kind of thing. And I think the other thing that I'm full aware of is it's going to change. Even whatever we start off with today is thinking is a great solution. Enjoy it while it lasts, because the likelihood is it's going to change or it'll be updated, modified, or whatever. I mean, I I'm always I shouldn't say always, but I seem to find that one pull down menu option thing that nobody ever goes to, and I fall in love with it and use it only to find out the update they've taken it out because nobody was using it. It's like so, but that's just kind of the way of the world, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways to look at it, right? Either you get like overwhelmed by the change of it, or you get excited um, about excited about the opportunity to up level something or figure out something new.
Yeah. Nope. Stay tuned. More to come. That's for sure. So, hey, David, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect?
Yeah, a couple ways. You can email me directly, David at nextrivet.com, nextrivet.com, or go to our website at nextrivet.com.
Awesome. Well, David Blumenfeld, I cannot say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Sounds good, Darren. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.
You're listening to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CREPN Radio.